The Ashford Group Tower had been dressed for Christmas like a bride who spent too much and didn't care who knew it. White lights poured down the marble pillars, down and down like frozen water that forgot how to fall all the way. The air smelled of pine and cinnamon and something expensive underneath, the kind of scent that costs more than most people make in a week. A tree stood near the executive elevators, tall enough to make grown men feel small. Champagne caught the glow of 1,000 tiny bulbs and threw it back, gold and trembling. And through all of it, a man in a faded gray work shirt moved like he wasn't quite there. Elias Thornwood was 36 years old, and he had learned a long time ago how to be invisible in a room full of people who mattered. It was a skill, a real one. You kept your eyes soft and your shoulders low, and you never ever looked like you wanted to be seen. His shirt had been washed so many times the color had given up. The elbows were thin. There was still a shadow of grease under one fingernail from the heating vent he'd fixed that afternoon, the one on the 4th floor that groaned like an old man every winter. Nobody looked at him twice, because that was the thing about a uniform. People saw the uniform and stopped looking. They saw the mop, the tool belt, the name stitched crooked over the pocket. They didn't see the hands, and if they had bothered to look at the hands, they still wouldn't have understood what they were seeing. Scars. A whole web of them across the right palm, silver and raised, catching the light in a way that made you look away before you could ask. Those hands used to make music. Real music, in rooms full of people who paid to listen. But that was another life. A life that had ended a long way from here, and Elias had buried it so deep that most days he almost believed it had happened to someone else. Almost. A small hand tugged at his. Daddy, Daddy, look. Wren was 7, and she moved through the world the way her mother used to, like she had never once been told she didn't belong somewhere. Dark curls. Wide brown eyes that took in the tree and the lights and the chocolate fountain near the dessert table, like she was memorizing all of it to tell someone later. She was wearing her good dress, the one that used to be too big and now fit just right, which meant it would be too small by spring, which meant Elias would have to find another one, which meant he stopped himself. Not tonight. Tonight she got to look at the lights. I see it, sweetheart, he said. It's something, isn't it? Can we get a strawberry? After I say hello to Mr. Dunmore, 2 minutes. Stay where I can see you. She was already gone. Not far. Just to the edge of the dessert table, up on her toes, reaching for something on a silver tray that sat a few inches beyond her fingers. And Elias watched her the way he always watched her, with a love so large it had nowhere to go, a love that pressed against the inside of his ribs and ached. Because he couldn't give her the things other kids had. No private school, no big house. Just a small apartment where the radiator clanked all night, and a father who worked doubles, and a piano in the community center down the street that she sometimes heard him play when she was supposed to be sleeping. 3 years now since Margot died. 3 years since the cancer took her in their own bed, in their own bedroom, with Wren asleep in the chair because their girl would not leave her mother's side. Elias had promised. He'd promised Margot he would keep music in Wren's life. And some promises are easy to make and hard to carry, especially at 2 in the morning after a 14-hour shift, when your daughter is finally asleep, and the silence in the apartment is so complete, you can hear your own heart asking questions you can't answer. He looked away from Wren for 1 second. One, to find Mr. Dunmore in the crowd, which was exactly when it happened. The floor near the dessert table was wet. Champagne, probably. Somebody's careless flute tipped and forgotten. Wren stretched up on her toes, reaching for that strawberry, and her small shoe found the slick patch of marble, and her foot went out from under her like the ground had simply decided to stop being there. She went down hard. The sound was small, a knee against stone, but Elias heard it across the whole loud room the way you only hear the things that matter, and he was moving before he knew he was moving, cutting through the crowd, dropping to the floor beside her as her face crumpled, and the first sob came out of her. Blood. Just a little, coming through the white tights. Hey, 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 Daddy's here. He had a handkerchief in his pocket. He always had a handkerchief in his pocket, clean and folded, because a man raising a little girl learns fast which things to keep close. He pressed it to her knee, gentle, and cupped the back of her head with his other hand, and brought his voice down low to that place that could calm almost anything. You're okay. It's just a scrape. We'll fix it. I've got you. Her sobs shrank into hiccups. She pressed her wet face into his shoulder, and then a voice came down from above them, sharp as a dropped glass. Can you control your child? Elias looked up. The man standing over them wore a suit that cost more than Elias made in 3 months. Chestnut hair styled to a shine. A jaw set tight with a kind of disgust that had nothing to do with the situation and everything to do with the man having decided long ago which people were worth his patience. Roderick Kane. Though Elias didn't know the name yet, he only knew the type. This is a corporate event, the man went on, gesturing at the small smear of red on the marble like it was a personal insult, not a daycare. If you can't afford a sitter, you shouldn't have brought her. Elias felt something go hot and tight in his chest. He kept his voice level. For Wren. She's 7. She slipped. It was an accident that wouldn't have happened if you knew your place. The man's eyes traveled down Elias's work shirt, slow, taking inventory. Your maintenance, there's a staff entrance for a reason. Wren's lip was trembling again, not from the knee now, from the voice. And something in Elias's chest cracked clean down the middle, because there is a particular fury a parent feels when someone makes their child smaller, and he opened his mouth, not sure yet what was going to come out of it. Except another voice got there first. You don't have the authority to speak to my employees that way. It came from the stairs. She came down the mezzanine steps slow, deliberate. Every step landing like she had all the time in the world, and the world had better wait for her. A crimson dress, bold and unapologetic, honey blonde hair falling past her shoulders, and eyes the pale blue of ice over deep water, the kind that measured a room the second they entered it and filed every person in it under useful or not. Seraphine Ashford, 34 years old. And she ran this building, this company, this whole glittering machine, and she had walked into more boardrooms than the man in the expensive suit had walked into rooms, period. She stopped in front of them. She did not look at Elias yet. She looked at the man. Apologize. The word was quiet. It left no room for anything to grow around it. The man's face went red. Seraphine, I was only. Apologize. Now. The whole lobby had gone still. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips, and the man pressed his mouth into a thin line and looked at the floor and got out a single clipped word that landed nowhere near Elias or his daughter. Sorry. Then Seraphine Ashford turned, and for the first time, she looked at the man kneeling on her marble floor with a bleeding child in his arms, and something in her face changed. She saw the way he held his daughter, the care in it, the scarred hand cradling the small head, gentle as if the child were made of something that could break. She saw the fury he was holding back for the girl's sake, coiled in his shoulders and going nowhere, and she felt something move through her that she couldn't name, something old, something that felt strangely like recognition, though she had never in her life seen this man before. She didn't understand it. She filed it away to not understand later. In this building, she said, and her voice carried across the whole silent lobby now, we don't measure people by their job title. We measure them by their character, and right now, yours is running low. She looked back down at Elias. Take care of your daughter. There's a first aid kit in the executive lounge, 5th floor. Use the private elevator. He nodded. His throat had closed too tight for words. He gathered Wren against his chest and stood and carried her toward the brass doors, and the crowd parted for him the way it had not parted when he walked in. Seraphine watched them go. She told herself it was nothing. A rude man put in his place, a small girl looked after. It happened. But she stood at the bottom of those stairs longer than she needed to, watching the elevator doors close on the father and the child, and the feeling stayed. It hung in the air like perfume in an empty room. The way he'd held her, gentle but unbreakable, like a boy she'd known once, a lifetime ago, who had looked at her the very same way. She shook her head and went back up the stairs. An hour passed. Ren's knee got a proper bandage, and her spirits came back the way a child's spirits do, restored by hot chocolate and a plate of cookies that a kind assistant named Priya had pressed into her hands. By the time Elias brought her back down, the party had grown louder and looser. Somebody had uncovered the piano. It sat in the corner. A vintage grand, black and gleaming, the kind of instrument that usually lived under a cloth and was treated as furniture. A tipsy man from accounting was picking out the same 3 chords over and over to a small, delighted crowd, and Elias felt his whole body want to walk the other way. But Ren had seen it. "Daddy." She tugged his hand. "Daddy, can you play? Sweetheart, please. Just one song, so I can sleep." And there it was, the whole ache of the last 3 years, sitting in his little girl's hopeful face. Because he hadn't played in front of anyone in years. Because the last time his hands had touched keys in front of a crowd, the crowd had been waiting to hear a rising talent, and what came after had ended everything he thought his life would be. But it was Christmas Eve, and she'd been so brave about her knee, and how do you say no to that face? You don't. He sat down at the piano. The crowd's chatter thinned out into curiosity. The accountant slid off the bench, grinning, giving up his spot, and Elias set his hands over the keys and let them hover there. And for one long second they trembled, the scarred right hand catching the light, and something old and locked rose up in him. Then he closed his eyes, and he began to play. The sound that filled the lobby was not like anything most of them had ever heard in a room like that. It came in soft, like rain on a window in the dark. Each note set down with a care that felt less like a performance, and more like someone telling you a secret they'd never told a living soul. And then it grew. It opened up and reached, climbing into something so aching and so beautiful that the champagne stopped moving, and the laughter stopped, and even the man from accounting stood there with his mouth slightly open. His damaged hand moved across the keys like the damage had never happened, like it remembered a version of itself from before. He played from somewhere underneath memory, from the marrow of him, and every note was a piece of his own heart laid out on that cold marble floor for anyone to walk on. The song had a name, though no one in the room knew it. He had written it a long time ago, for a girl who never knew he existed. He had poured everything he couldn't say into notes, because words had always failed him and music never had, and then he had given it away, given it to someone else to deliver. Because that is what you do when you love someone from the shadows. You give them the most beautiful thing you have, and you let them put their own name on it, and you go home, and you never ask for the credit. Up on the mezzanine, Seraphine had been reaching for her coat. The music reached her first. She froze with her hand halfway to the brass railing, and then her fingers closed around it, tight, tighter, until the knuckles went white. Because she knew this song. She knew it the way you know your own name called across a crowded room. Every note, every pause, every aching phrase, exactly as it had been played for her once before, on a summer night 16 years ago when she was 18 and the stars had seemed close enough to touch. She was on that dock again. A boy beside her, dark hair, that electric, careless grin. His fingers on a portable keyboard, and his voice going soft in a way it never went in front of anyone else. I'm calling it Stardust Vow. It holds everything I feel but can't say. His name was Sebastian. And 3 weeks after that night, 2 police officers had stood on her parents' doorstep in the rain. and one of them had taken off his hat, and the world she'd been living in had simply ended. The song had been all she had left of him, the last piece. She had never gone looking for a recording, because there were none, and she had told herself she preferred it that way, kept it safe and private in the one locked room inside her that the rest of her ruthless life never touched. She hummed it in empty apartments. She heard it in board meetings when her father's voice in her head told her to be harder, colder, more. It was proof that once briefly she had been loved for who she was and not for what she could provide. But now someone else was playing it, a stranger, a man in a faded work shirt with scars on his hands. And there was no recording, there was no sheet music, no one knew this song, no one alive. Her vision blurred. Her chest went tight, each breath a small piece of work. Around her the guests murmured their soft appreciation. Lovely, isn't he wonderful? Who is that? And none of them knew that the floor had just dropped out from under one woman on the mezzanine stairs. How? How could this stranger, this janitor she had met 1 hour ago on her own marble floor, be playing a song that died with a boy 16 years ago? She came down the stairs on legs that didn't feel like her own, down toward the piano, pulled like a needle to a lodestone, past the guests, past the tree, until she was standing only a few feet from him. Elias played the last note. He let it ring out and fade and die into the air, and then he opened his eyes and found the CEO of Ashford Group standing in front of him, her face pale, her ice blue eyes swimming with something that had no business being there, not in those eyes, not in that woman. For a moment, neither of them breathed. "Where?" she said, and her voice came out wrecked, barely a whisper, nothing like the voice that had silenced the whole lobby an hour before. "Where did you learn that song?" Elias stood up slowly. His heart was going hard against his ribs, because he had known this moment might come someday. He had dreaded it, and some small, buried, foolish part of him had waited for it. "It's just an old melody," he said. "Something I picked up a long time ago." "Don't." Her voice cracked on the word. She stepped closer. "Don't lie to me. That song was written for me, by someone who died 16 years ago. No one else has ever heard it. No one else could know it." She searched his face like the answer was written somewhere on it. "Who are you?" And Elias stood there, his daughter's small hand finding his, the scars on his palm gone cold, every wall he had spent years building rising up inside him at once because he wasn't ready. Not here, not like this. "Daddy?" Ren was at his side, sleepy, tugging his sleeve, smiling up at the beautiful, frightening woman like she was just another grown-up. "That was beautiful, Daddy," she said. "Can we go home now?" And Elias looked at Seraphine Ashford one last time, saw the tears standing in her eyes, saw 16 years of grief cracking open on a stranger's face, and he did the only thing he knew how to do when the past came looking for him. He picked up his little girl. He gathered her coat, and he ran. Seraphine did not sleep that night. She lay in her penthouse, high above the city, and every time she closed her eyes, the song was there, waiting, 16 years old and perfectly preserved, like something kept in ice. And underneath the song, another image kept pushing in, uninvited. A man's scarred hands moving across the keys. The sorrow carved into the lines around his eyes. The way he'd picked up his daughter and turned and walked out of her lobby like the floor was on fire. He'd run from her. People did not run from Seraphine Ashford. They ran toward her. They chased her attention across rooms, laughed a little too hard at things she said that weren't funny. And this man, this stranger in a work shirt, had looked at her with 16 years of grief in his eyes, and then he had run, which meant he was hiding something, which meant he knew exactly what he'd done. She was at the office by 5, before the coffee, before the sun. She pulled his file herself because she didn't trust her voice enough yet to ask anyone to do it for her, Elias Thornwood, and the file told her almost nothing, which was, in itself, a kind of answer. Hired 3 years ago. Maintenance. No degree. Previous work at a warehouse, a grocery store, a string of odd jobs that went nowhere and told no story. Emergency contact, one line. Wren Thornwood, daughter, age 7, no wife, no partner, nothing about music. Nothing that explained how a man who fixed toilets on the night shift could sit down at a Steinway and reach into a stranger's chest and take hold of her heart. The file was a wall built to look like a floor. She sat with it a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called a number she had not dialed in over a decade. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady, which annoyed her, which she ignored. It rang 4 times. Seraphine? The voice was older than she remembered, roughened by the years, but underneath it the same warmth. Is that really you? Dr. Cornelius Byrne had been Sebastian's teacher at the conservatory. The old man who'd heard genius in a 17-year-old with too much fire and not enough discipline. She had not spoken to him since the funeral. Because she couldn't. Because for years she couldn't be in the same room as anyone who reminded her of what she'd lost. I need to see you, she said, professional. Or she tried. But something in her voice got through, some hairline crack in the marble, because there was a pause on the other end that lasted a beat too long. Today, it's about Sebastian. The pause stretched. I'll come to your office, he said. Give me 4 hours. He arrived that evening. A lean man in his late 50s, silver threading through his hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He came without a single question, the way old teachers do when a student who broke their heart finally calls. She played him a video. Someone had filmed Elias at the party on a phone and posted it to a private group for Ashford employees. And Priya had found it that morning without being asked, because Priya was better at her job than Seraphine deserved. The picture was poor, the sound tinny and thin. But the melody came through. Dr. Byrne listened in silence. She watched his face and could read nothing on it. When the video ended, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes with a thumb and forefinger, slow, the way a man does when he's been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just felt the weight of it again. That's remarkable, he said quietly. Is it Stardust Vow? She leaned forward. Is it Sebastian's song? And the old man hesitated. In that hesitation, she saw the shape of something kept too long in the dark. It's the same melody. Yes. He set his glasses on her desk with great care. But, Seraphine, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 16 years ago. He looked up. I didn't. Because I thought the truth would hurt you more than the silence would. Her heart began to pound. Sebastian didn't finish that song. The words didn't make sense. She waited for them to rearrange into something she could understand. He wrote the opening. Byrne went on, the first 8 bars. And they were brilliant. He was always brilliant. That was never the question. But he got stuck. He couldn't find where it wanted to go. He'd scrap a version, start over, scrap it again. I watched him torture himself over that melody for 2 weeks. Her hands had gone flat on the desk, pressing down, as if the desk might otherwise float away. There was another student at that summer camp. The old man's voice dropped. A quiet one, older than most of them on a scholarship he could barely afford to use. Talented in a way nobody paid attention to, because he never asked anybody to. From a poor family, he kept to himself, and Sebastian asked him for help. The room tilted very slightly on its axis. That boy took Sebastian's 8 bars, Byrne said, and he finished them. He turned them into the thing you heard on that dock, into the thing you just played me. It was his. The heart of that song was his. The old man's shoulders sank, and then Sebastian died, and the song became his legacy. And I never corrected the record, because I didn't know how. And because Sebastian was my star, and admitting he hadn't finished his masterpiece felt like taking something from a boy who'd already lost everything. So I said nothing. For 16 years. Her mouth had gone dry. Who was he, she said. The other student. What was his name? And Byrne shook his head, and she wanted to reach across the desk and shake it out of him. I don't remember. He said it with genuine grief. It was 16 years ago. I taught hundreds of kids over those summers, and this one didn't want to be remembered. He never fought for the credit. When Sebastian died, he just disappeared. Didn't come back the next summer. I assumed he'd given up music. Boys like that often do. The world doesn't leave them much room. He looked at the frozen frame on her laptop. Elias, eyes closed, face lit from below by the piano's little reading light, wearing an expression that looked like prayer or like penance. But there's only one way to find out, Seraphine. He put his glasses back on. You ask him, so she tried. She called down to maintenance the moment Byrne left and asked if Elias Thornwood was working that night. And the supervisor sounded confused because the CEO did not call down to maintenance to ask about the night shift. No, ma'am. He called in sick this morning, first time in 3 years. Tomorrow, he put in for personal days through the end of the week. Something cold slid into her stomach and settled there. I need his address. She sent Otto Reyes, her head of security, a big man, ex-military, with a soldier's stillness and a discretion she trusted more than she trusted most things. He was back in an hour, and the look on his face made the cold thing in her stomach spread out into her chest. Seraphine. He didn't sit. I went to the address on file. Apartment building, east side, rough part of town. He paused. He's gone. Landlord, says Thornwood, and the little girl moved out 3 days ago. Paid rent through the end of the month in cash. Left no forwarding address. The landlord doesn't think he had one. 3 days ago. She turned the number over in her mind and it wouldn't come out right. 3 days ago was before the party. Before she'd cornered him at the piano. Before she'd asked him a single question. He hadn't run because of her. He'd already been running. He'd already packed the suitcases and paid the rent and decided to vanish. And then he'd walked into her Christmas party anyway, one last time, and let his daughter talk him into playing. Which meant the song hadn't been an accident. Which meant some part of him had wanted to be found, even as the rest of him packed to disappear. Did anyone see them leave? She asked. Neighbor across the hall. Said they went early, just before dawn. Couple of suitcases, that was all. Otto's jaw worked, said the little girl was crying. Thornwood told her they were going on an adventure. He hesitated. The neighbor said he looked scared. Scared, and she saw it then exactly as it had happened without wanting to. A cramped apartment in the dark before sunrise, a man packing his whole life into 2 suitcases, and a 7-year-old standing in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, asking where they were going, why now, and a father crouching to her level and building a smile out of nothing and calling it an adventure. Because that is what you do when you are terrified and there is a child watching. You build a smile out of nothing. She had driven him to that, or something had, and she needed to know what, because here is the thing that would not let her rest. It wasn't only the song. The song was impossible, yes, and the song had cracked her open. But underneath the song was the way he had looked at her. On the marble floor, with his daughter bleeding in his arms, he had looked up at her like he knew her, really knew her, not the CEO, not the dress, her, the way almost no one ever had, and then he'd run. She spent 2 weeks looking for a man who did not want to be found. She hired a private investigator, discreet, expensive, the kind who found people who'd taken real trouble to stay lost. He found nothing. No credit card charges, no cell phone pings, no trace of Elias Thornwood or his daughter anywhere in the city, as if the two of them had simply stepped out of the world. And in the empty space where the answers should have been, the rest of her life kept happening. Roderick came by the office more and more, her fiancé, though the word had always sat strangely in her mouth, like a coat that fit in the shoulders and nowhere else. He came with seating charts and menu tastings and his mother's phone calls, all the small machinery of a wedding 6 weeks away. And Seraphine sat across from him and heard almost none of it. because her mind kept going back to a summer dock and a portable keyboard, to a boy she'd loved who, it turned out, had never written the thing she'd loved him most for, and to another boy she'd never noticed in the corner, watching, giving away the most beautiful thing he had, and letting someone else carry it to her door. Her father called from Palm Springs daily to make sure she wasn't jeopardizing the deal with cold feet, to remind her that the merger with Roderick's firm would close 2 weeks after the wedding, that markets he'd been trying to crack for years were waiting, that this was not the moment to get sentimental. And she said, yes, of course, everything's fine, the way she'd been saying it her whole life. Except she'd catch herself late at night at the penthouse window with the whole city spread out cold and glittering below her, humming 8 bars of a song and then stopping. Because the 9th bar, the part that had always made her cry, the part that reached, that was the part that hadn't been Sebastian's at all. That reaching, that ache, that had come from a stranger. The cruelest thing about losing someone, she thought one night, her breath fogging the glass, isn't that they're gone. It's finding out, years later, that you never really knew them. 2 weeks after Elias vanished, the snow came down thick and heavy over the city, muffling everything, laying a white silence over the streets and the rooftops and the traffic below. Seraphine was working late, alone, because she was always working late and always alone, and she just reached for her coat when she heard it. Piano, drifting up from the lobby, faint, haunting, impossible. She didn't call for the elevator, she ran. Down the stairs in heels, her hand skimming the rail, her breath coming too fast. Some animal certainty driving her, that if she moved too slowly he would dissolve, he would be gone again, smoke through her fingers. The lobby was empty. Empty except for one figure at the piano. His back was to her, his shoulders hunched like a man carrying a weight only he could see. And he was playing Stardust Vow again, except this time it was different, slower, sadder, like a man saying goodbye to something he had loved too long and from too far away. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs. You came back, she said. The music stopped. His hands went still on the keys. He didn't turn around. I shouldn't have run. His voice was low, almost too quiet to catch. Ren asked me why we left, and I couldn't give her a good answer. A breath. She liked it here. She liked the cookies your assistant gave her. She liked the lights. She liked the nice lady who let us ride the fancy elevator. He turned on the bench finally, and she saw the exhaustion carved into every line of him. 2 weeks of it. Maybe 16 years. I owe you the truth, he said, even if you hate me for it. And Seraphine Ashford, who had spent her whole life keeping her distance, who measured every room and trusted almost no one, took one step toward him across the empty marble. I could never hate you, she said, for playing that beautifully. She crossed the rest of the marble slowly, careful, like the floor between them might give way. I need to understand, she said. That song, Sebastian was supposed to have written it for me before he died. But Dr. Byrne told me the truth. He didn't finish it. Someone else did. She stopped just behind him. Was it you? Elias stood up from the bench, slow, deliberate, the way a man rises when he knows there's no sitting back down after this. Up close she could see the silver threading through his light brown hair, the fine lines cut around his eyes by too many sleepless nights. But his eyes held hers and didn't flinch. Gray-green, achingly honest. Yes, he said, it was me. Her knees nearly went out from under her. She caught the edge of the piano, gripped it, held on. Why? She said. Why would you do that? Why would you let him take the credit? Because he loved you. Elias stepped back from the piano, like the instrument itself might burn him, and I was nobody. She stood frozen, trying to hold the impossible shape of it. The man in front of her had written the song that got her through 16 years of grief. I was at that camp on a scholarship I could barely afford, he said, and the words came slow, like they cost him. My father died when I was 15. He was a mechanic, died under a car when the jack gave out. My mother cleaned houses. My little sister needed braces we couldn't pay for. He looked toward the tall windows, the falling snow. I worked nights just to afford the bus fare to camp and back, so I could spend my days pretending I belonged with kids whose parents wrote checks and never looked at the number. She stayed silent. Because some things you don't interrupt. I played piano because it was the only time I felt like I was worth something. He almost laughed, and there was no humor in it. And then I saw you. The confession hung between them like something you could touch. You wouldn't remember. Why would you? I was invisible. He was still looking at the snow. But I watched you laugh with Sebastian. Watched the way your whole face lit up when he played. And I thought, that's what love looks like. That's what it means to matter to someone. A pause. And I wanted to give you that, even if you never knew it came from me. Seraphine found her voice. It came out rough. So you wrote a love song, she said, for another man to give to me. I wrote a love song for you. He turned back, and the raw honesty on his face made her chest ache. Sebastian just delivered it. He knew I had feelings I couldn't say. He wasn't cruel about it. He offered to tell you the truth. I said no. Why? Because I told him you were meant for someone like him, someone brilliant, someone whole. He shook his head slowly. Not someone like me. The lobby felt too small, the air too thin. She held on to the piano because it was solid and real, and she needed one thing in the room to be both. And then he died, she said. And then he died. His voice broke on it, and I let the song be his legacy, because it made you happy, because it gave you something to hold on to. He wiped a hand across his mouth, and I went home, and I tried to forget I'd ever been anyone but what I am now. Her tears came then, hot and unstoppable, 16 years of them. Because the man she'd mourned all this time hadn't written the thing that saved her. A stranger had. A boy who loved her from the shadows and gave his whole heart away and never once asked for anything back. And it rearranged her entire life, that fact. It reached into her memory and moved the furniture in every room. What happened to you? She said, desperate now. Dr. Burns said you were talented. He said you could have had a career. Why are you fixing pipes instead of playing concert halls? And Elias held up his right hand. He turned it so the light caught the scars, the whole silver web of them, across the palm up into the wrist. The ruined tissue caught the glow of the Christmas lights still strung along the lobby, throwing small shadows into the valleys where surgical steel had tried and failed to put back together what had been destroyed. 3 years after that summer, he said, I signed a contract with a performance company. He looked at her. Ashford Productions. Your father's company. The name landed on her like cold water. It was supposed to be my break. A regional concert series. 20 cities. My name on a poster for the first time in my life. His jaw tightened. Opening night was in another city. I got there early for rehearsal. The stage crew was still setting the lighting rig. I was walking past when I heard it, this crack, metal fatigue. His eyes went distant, seeing something she couldn't. The whole truss started to come down, and there was a cellist right underneath it. Young, 19 maybe, her back to the stage, tuning her instrument. She didn't hear it. She didn't see it coming. He swallowed. I shoved her out of the way, and my hand got caught in the rig when it fell. 1/2 ton of it. He said the next part flat. Emptied of feeling. The way people speak when the pain is too big to carry in the voice. They told me later the bones were pulverized. Like crushing an egg in your fist. 3 surgeries couldn't put it back. Her vision blurred all over again. Because it was her father's company, her family's cost-cutting, her family's negligence that had reached across 13 years and destroyed the hand in front of her. The investigation said it was cheap equipment, Elias said. Somebody approved substandard rigging to save money, to make the margins look better. He finally met her eyes. Your father's company settled quietly with everyone involved. I got enough to cover the medical bills. Barely. $75,000. The bills came to 68. And the contract, she said. Her voice was almost gone. What was it worth? 300,000 for the tour, plus recordings if it went well, endorsements maybe. A thin, cold smile. Byrne said I could have had a real career. Nothing enormous, but solid. Enough to support a family and do the thing I loved. He let it sit there in the cold air between them. And your father gave me 75,000. He shrugged. And there was no self-pity in it, which somehow made it worse. So I learned to fix the things that break. Seemed fitting, don't you think? The broken pianist fixing broken pipes. Seraphine could not speak, because her whole life, the whole glittering empire, the penthouse, the crimson dress, the boardroom she ruled, all of it stood on a foundation her father had built, and she had always known Alaric Ashford was hard. She'd watched him crush competitors without a flicker. But she had told herself always that she was different, that she ran things better, cleaner, and she had never once looked down into the basement to see whose bodies the foundation was resting on. Did you know? Elias asked quietly. When you took over this building, did you know who I was? Not at first. I needed the job, any job. After the accident, nobody would hire me for music. I was damaged goods. He looked back at the snow. So I learned plumbing, electrical, whatever paid, and then Margot got sick. Something moved across his face when he said the name. Grief worn smooth by handling. My wife, he said. Ren's mother, she was a nurse. We met 3 years after the accident. She knew the whole story, and she married me anyway. Told me she didn't care that I'd never be famous. Said she loved the man I was, not the man I could have been. Seraphine's chest was caving in on itself. When the cancer came, I would have done anything. But all I had were my hands and my willingness to work. So I worked 3 jobs. 2 years while she went through chemo, radiation, the experimental things insurance wouldn't touch. He stopped. She died anyway. In our apartment, in our bed, with Ren asleep in the chair beside her, because our girl would not leave her mother's side. The tears were running down Seraphine's face now, and she wasn't even trying to stop them. Margot made me promise to keep music in Ren's life, Elias said. So when I saw the posting here, good pay, real health insurance, the kind that actually covers things, I applied. His voice cracked. Different name on the paperwork. Ashford Group, Ashford Productions. I didn't put it together. And then I got here, and I saw your name in the directory. And I wondered if you were related to the man who owned the company that destroyed me. And then you saw me, she whispered. And then I saw you, and I knew. Why did you stay? He was quiet for a moment. Because I'm a coward, he said. Because seeing you from across a lobby was better than not seeing you at all. His voice was raw now, laid open. Because maybe, in some small, stupid way, fixing the things that broke in your building could make up for the fact that I couldn't fix the thing that actually mattered. He let the scarred hand fall to his side, and because Ren needed stability and health care and a father who could put food on the table, even if he couldn't give her anything else. And Seraphine moved without deciding to. She crossed the last of the distance between them, and she reached out, and she took his damaged hand in both of hers, lifted it. The scars felt rough under her fingertips, raised, badly healed despite everything expensive that had been done to it. I'm sorry, she said, and the words felt pathetically small in her mouth. I'm so sorry for what my father did to you. You didn't do it. I benefited from it. Her voice went sharp, turned on herself. This building, this company, everything I've built, it's all standing on people like you. People my father crushed and paid off and forgot. She looked up at him. I always told myself I was different, but I never looked. I never once asked about the bodies in the basement, because I didn't want to know the answer. Elias closed his fingers around hers, the ones that would still close. You're not responsible for your father's sins, he said. Aren't I? I took his company, I expanded it, made it more profitable. All of it built on money he made by destroying people. She shook her head. How many others are there? I don't know. His voice softened. But Seraphine, whatever your father did, you are not him. She looked at him. The way you handled Ren that night, he said. The way you stood up to that man at the party. The way you're standing here right now, letting your heart break over something you didn't cause. That's not him. That's you. And the kindness of it undid her completely. Because no one talked to her this way. No one had in years. People flattered her, or feared her, or wanted something. This man, who had every reason on earth to hate her, was standing in her cold, empty lobby at midnight, holding her father's cruelty in his ruined hand, and telling her she was good. Her composure, the armor of a lifetime, finally shattered, and she sank down onto the piano bench, and her shoulders shook with sobs she'd been holding back for 2 weeks. For 16 years, if she was honest. Elias hesitated only a moment. Then he sat down beside her on the bench. He didn't touch her. He didn't offer some empty comfort. He just sat there, in the quiet, while she came apart, so she wouldn't have to come apart alone. When the worst of it had passed, she wiped her eyes with the back of a shaking hand. I need to know something, she said. Her voice was wrecked. If I asked you to give me a chance, to let me really know you, would you be brave enough to say yes? She turned to look at him. Even with all of this, even though the world will call you a gold digger and call me a fool, and something came into his eyes that was equal parts hope and pure terror. I wrote you a love song 16 years ago, he said. I think I can manage a little courage now. She laughed. Wet and broken and real, the sound tearing its way up through the tears. Over the following weeks, they learned each other slowly. They met in the evenings after the building emptied, when the last elevator had stopped and the cleaning crews had gone home. Careful conversations that built something a piece at a time. He told her about Margot, the wife he'd found late, who worked double shifts at the hospital while he recovered and never once made him feel like less than a whole man. About Ren's birth during a blizzard, the ambulance stuck across town, Elias delivering his own daughter on the bathroom floor with his ruined hands, and Seraphine gave him back pieces of herself she'd kept locked away for decades. Her mother, dead of an aneurysm when Seraphine was 12. No warning. Their one morning gone by the afternoon. Her father, in the years after, hardening from stern into something colder, demanding a perfection no child could reach, punishing anything less with a silence worse than any shout. He never hit me, she said one night, staring out at the city. He never had to. He had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you disappointed him on a cellular level. And there was Roderick, her father's choice. The next logical acquisition, a man with the right pedigree and the right connections, a merger dressed up as a marriage, approved before he'd even proposed. I said yes because I didn't have a reason to say no, she told him. I didn't love him. But I didn't love anyone. It seemed like as good a reason to get married as any. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Elias said. You spent 16 years loving someone who didn't know you existed, she said. I spent 16 years frozen at 18, mourning a boy over a song he didn't even write. We're both pretty good at sad. And he smiled, and it changed his whole face. The difference is, he said, we get to write the ending now. Ren complicated everything, in the best way. The girl took to Seraphine with a directness that was equal parts disarming and terrifying, because 7-year-olds do not know the rules about how you're supposed to speak to a woman who runs a building. She showed up at the executive floor unannounced to display her drawings. She asked why Seraphine wore such uncomfortable-looking shoes, and one evening, when Elias was running late, Ren climbed into the chair across from Seraphine's desk and studied her with an unsettling seriousness. Are you my daddy's friend? Seraphine set down her pen. I think so. Yes, good, because he needs more friends. Ren said it the way children say the truest things, plainly, without knowing they're breaking your heart. He's always alone, except for me. Mommy used to say he needed people, but after she died, he stopped talking to everyone. He just works and takes care of me and plays piano when he thinks I'm asleep. Seraphine went very still. What makes you think he's sad? She asked softly. The music. Ren tucked her knees up under her. When he plays at the community center late at night, it sounds different than when he plays for me. Heavier, like he's trying to tell somebody something but doesn't have the words. She tilted her head. But after the Christmas party, his music sounded lighter, like maybe he finally found the words. And Seraphine sat there, at her enormous desk, exposed to the bone by a 7-year-old, and understood that all her walls, all 16 years of them, had just been seen straight through by a little girl with her mother's eyes. I'm glad the music sounds lighter, she managed. Me too. Ren grinned, showing the gap where a tooth used to be. Daddy's lonely. But he doesn't have to be. You could stay with him, if you wanted. And it wasn't a question. It was a child handing her the simplest truth in the world and trusting her to be brave enough to take it. By late January, the walls were coming down for good. And Seraphine knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that she was going to have to burn her whole careful life to the ground. Because you cannot build something true on a foundation of lies. And her wedding was 5 weeks away. Roderick Kane came to her office on a Tuesday afternoon, and she knew from the set of his shoulders that the pretending was over. He didn't sit. He stood at her window, backlit by the pale winter sun, and for a moment he looked less like a man and more like a paper cutout of one. Perfect hair, perfect coat, and something nervous humming underneath all that polish. A current she'd never noticed because she'd never bothered to look. We need to talk about the wedding, he said. She kept her eyes on her screen. Not now, Roderick. I'm in the middle of the Harbor Line contracts. It's been 4 weeks since you answered a single one of my planning emails. I've been busy. The caterer needs numbers. My mother's been calling your assistant because you won't return her calls. His voice climbed, cracking the surface. Are you even planning to show up, or should I start canceling things? And Seraphine finally looked at him, really looked, at the desperation underneath the anger. Do you love me, Roderick? The question stopped him cold. What kind of? A simple one. She stood. Do you love me? Not the merger, not the markets my father wants to crack. Me. His jaw worked. She watched him reach for an answer and come back with nothing that fit. I respect you, he said finally. We make a good partnership. That's more than most marriages have. But you don't love me. Love is for children and poets. He leaned in, palms flat on her desk. We're adults building something. What we have is better than love. It's strategic. It lasts. And Seraphine thought about a pair of scarred hands on piano keys, about a man who'd written her a song and given it away and asked for nothing, about a wife who died in her own bed while her husband worked 3 jobs to buy her more time. You're right, she said. Her voice came out colder than she meant it. Love is for children and poets, and apparently for janitors who give their hearts away and never send a bill. She held his eyes. But not for people like us. Something shifted in his face. The polish came off, and underneath was calculation, sharp and quick. This is about him, he said, the maintenance worker. The one who played piano at the party. I've seen you talking to him. He has a name. Elias Thornwood. I don't care what his name is. And here the last of the pleasant mask fell away, and the voice that came out of Roderick Kane was one she had never heard before. Flat. Hard. I care that you're about to blow up everything we've built. Do you have any idea what that would do? The board answers to me, she said, and I don't answer to you. Roderick straightened, and then he did the thing that told her, finally and completely, exactly what kind of man her father had chosen for her. He smiled. I was hoping you'd be reasonable, he said. I really was. He set something on her desk. A folder, slim, ordinary, the kind of ordinary that makes the hair stand up on your arms. She didn't touch it. What is that? Insurance, he said. In case you got any ideas. She opened it. because she had to, and her stomach dropped through the floor, because inside were photographs, grainy security footage gray, pulled from her own building's cameras. Her and Elias in the empty lobby, sitting close on the piano bench, her hand on his head bent toward hers. Nothing that was, on its own, a crime, but framed a certain way, handed to the right reporter at the right moment. A CEO, a married-in 6-week CEO, and the man who fixed her building's pipes. "You've been having me followed," she said. "I've been protecting an investment." He tucked his hands in his pockets, comfortable now, a man who thought he'd already won. The wedding happens. The merger closes. Or these find their way to every business desk in the city, along with a very sad story about a lonely woman and the help who took advantage of her. Let's see how your board reacts to that. The room went strange and quiet, and here is the thing about a lifetime of fear. You learn its taste. And Seraphine had lived on that taste since she was 12 years old, since a father turned to ice and a mother turned to nothing. And she had spent every year after arranging her whole life so that no one could ever again make her feel that small. And she felt it now, the old cold fear rising up, except this time underneath it, something else rose too. Because she thought of Ren, she thought of a 7-year-old handing her the truth across a desk and trusting her to be brave. And she realized, standing there with those photographs in her hand, that she was more afraid of who she'd be if she gave in than of anything Roderick Kane could put in a newspaper. "Get out of my office," she said. His smile flickered. "Seraphine, get out, before I have Otto do it for you." He gathered his coat. He was still smiling when he reached the door, but it didn't fit right anymore. "Think about it," he said. "You've got until the weekend." And then he was gone. Seraphine did not think about it. She called Priya. "I need everything," she said. "Every document tied to the Kane merger, every wire transfer, every valuation, every email his firm has sent us in 18 months. And I need you to do it quietly. Don't tell a soul what you're looking for." Priya, who was better at her job than anyone knew, looked at her boss for one long moment and understood. How far back? To the beginning, since the negotiation started. Priya was back in 3 hours. She did not call. She came in person, a slim folder in her hand and an expression on her face that Seraphine had never seen there before. "Seraphine." She set it down. "You need to see this." They spread it across the conference table, and what Priya had found went well past irregular, because Roderick Kane was not a wealthy man pretending to be wealthier. He was a drowning man, and the merger was the rope. His firm's real numbers, buried under inflated valuations and consulting fees that corresponded to no actual consulting, told a story he'd worked hard to keep from telling. He was broke. Worse than broke. For the better part of a year, he had been quietly moving money that belonged to his own investors, tens of millions of it, hiding the holes behind projections that would never come true. And the marriage, the beautiful strategic marriage her father had blessed, was never about building an empire. It was a bailout. Marrying into Ashford would have given him quiet access to accounts deep enough to paper over everything he'd stolen before anyone came looking. "He chose me," Seraphine said slowly, and the realization was worse than the theft itself. "He chose me because he knew my father would push the merger. He knew I'd be so focused on the terms, on making my father proud, that I'd never look too closely at his books. There's more." Priya's voice was careful. "The board, he's already talked to 2 of them, Bradford and one other. He's been laying groundwork. If you try to call this off, he's going to move first. Tell them your judgment is compromised, that you've lost the thread, that there's a man," and there it was. The whole trap laid out, because Roderick had known. He'd known she might find the courage to walk away, and he'd built his defense in advance. A CEO undone by a broken heart and a maintenance worker. It was a good story. It was a story people wanted to believe about a woman who ran a company, because it confirmed everything they'd always suspected. which meant she couldn't just cancel a wedding. She'd have to win a war. That evening, she called Elias. "Don't come to the building tomorrow," she said, "and keep Ren close. Whatever happens, I need the two of you somewhere safe until it's over." "Seraphine, what's happening?" "Something I should have done a long time ago." She hung up before he could argue, and she stood at her window, and she made one more call to a number in Palm Springs, and when the cold voice answered, she said only, "Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. Your old office. We need to talk about Roderick. Don't be late." Across town, in a small apartment where the radiator clanked, Elias set his phone down and stood very still, because he'd heard something in her voice he didn't like, and because he knew, better than most, what it cost to walk into a room and set fire to your own life. "Daddy?" Ren appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, hugging a stuffed rabbit. "Was that the nice lady? Is she okay?" He crouched down to her level. "She's about to be very brave," he said. "The way you're brave. Remember what I told you? About how being brave doesn't mean you're not scared?" Ren nodded solemnly. "It means you're scared, and you do the right thing anyway." "That's right." He kissed the top of her head. "That's exactly right." And he stayed up long after she'd fallen asleep, sitting at the little upright keyboard by the window, not playing, just resting his ruined hand on the keys, thinking about a woman about to lose her whole world to tell the truth, and about the strange fact that after all these years of believing his life had ended on a stage, the most frightening thing he'd ever have to do might be to let himself be happy. Alaric Ashford was already waiting when she arrived at 7, the old office on the 45th floor, the one he'd refused to fully surrender even in retirement, because a man like that never really lets go of anything. He looked older than she remembered from Thanksgiving. Silver hair, deeper lines, but the eyes were the same, cold and quick and calculating. "This had better be worth dragging me out of Palm Springs," he said, and Seraphine laid it out. Every document, every wire transfer, each one another nail. She watched her father read it all, with that terrible precision that had made him feared for 40 years, and his face never changed, but she saw the arithmetic moving behind his eyes. "Roderick Kane has been stealing from his own investors for over a year," she said. "Tens of millions. He's using our merger to cover the hole. The wedding was never a partnership. It was a con, and I'm calling all of it off." Alaric set the papers down. "This complicates things," he said. "Complicates." Her voice rose despite herself. "He's a criminal. He tried to blackmail me yesterday. And you're worried it complicates things?" "I'm worried you're throwing away a $200 million merger because of wounded pride." He stood, walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Or because of your new project, the maintenance worker. Roderick told me you've been sneaking around with him." He turned. "Is that what this really is? You've decided to play savior to a failed musician, and you're using Roderick's poor judgment as an excuse?" And Seraphine felt her control slip. "His name is Elias Thornwood," she said. "And yes, I care about him. But that has nothing to do with Roderick being a thief. Everything has to do with everything. In business." Her father's voice dripped contempt. "I taught you that. You want to talk about poor judgment?" She was on her feet now, too. "Let's talk about Ashford Productions. Let's talk about the cost-cutting that crushed Elias's hand 13 years ago. The cheap rigging you personally approved. The $75,000 you paid to make him disappear." Something flickered across her father's face. She'd never seen it before. "Ancient history," he said. The boy was compensated. He was a concert pianist with a $300,000 contract. Her voice shook with a fury 16 years in the making. "You destroyed his future and paid him barely enough to cover his medical bills. That's not compensation. That's hush money. It was business." And here the ice came back, complete, absolute, acceptable risk. These things happen. If he'd had real talent, he'd have found another way. The fact that he's cleaning toilets now only proves I was right to cut my losses. And something inside Seraphine broke, clean, like a frozen branch snapping at last under a weight it had carried too long, because she saw him then, fully, for maybe the first time in her life. A man so devoted to power that he'd fed every human being he ever loved into it, one at a time, and called the ashes acceptable risk. A man who had looked at his own daughter's grief and called it weakness. A man who could never understand what she was about to do. You taught me that power means never apologizing, she said, and her voice was suddenly terribly calm. Never showing weakness. Never letting anyone in. She picked up her bag. But you know what real power is, Father? It's having the courage to admit when you were wrong. It's choosing to do the right thing when it costs you everything. And it's standing up to the person who hurt you most, even when that person is family. Alaric's face went dark. If you do this, he said, you are no daughter of mine. And the words that should have shattered her landed instead like a door swinging open. Then I suppose, she said, I've been an orphan for a very long time. She left him standing there, frozen with a fury that had nowhere to go, and she did not look back. The board convened at 2 o'clock, 12 of them around the long table, old money and new, and every one of them there to protect a return on their investment. Her father sat at the far end, a violation of his own retirement, but no one dared say so, because he had built this from nothing and his presence still bent the room. Seraphine stood at the head of the table, and she thought about running from a party 6 weeks ago and a song she'd thought she understood, and a little girl with a gap-toothed grin telling her that being brave meant being scared and doing it anyway. She clicked the first slide, and she told them everything. The theft, the blackmail, the wire transfers Roderick had buried. And then, because her father tried to stand and turn it back on her, because he pulled up the photographs and called her compromised, called Elias a con artist come to prey on a lonely woman, she did the one thing none of them saw coming. She told them who Elias Thornwood really was. That song you may have heard about, she said. The one from the party. Stardust Vow. She looked at her father as she said it. It was written 16 years ago, not by the man I mourned. By a poor scholarship kid in the corner nobody noticed, who gave it away and never signed his name to it. And 13 years ago, this company crushed his hand and paid him off and forgot him. Her voice did not waver. You want to talk about my judgment? My judgment is finally clear, for the first time in my life, and the room, full of people who measured everything in dollars, went utterly silent, because they had come expecting a scandal about a broken engagement, and what they'd gotten instead was a mirror. The vote took 30 minutes. Seraphine waited in her office while it happened, watching the snow start up again outside her window, laying its clean white blanket over a city full of grime it couldn't fix, but could, for a little while, hide. Priya brought her coffee she didn't drink. Otto stood by the door like a man guarding something that mattered, and she did not let herself hope. When the call came to return to the conference room, she walked in with her spine straight and her chin level, ready to lose everything she had spent her whole life building. The board looked at her. 12 faces she'd known for years and never once let close. Margaret Vane, the eldest of them, a contemporary of her father's, spoke for the room. The board votes 7-5, she said, to support your decision. We're terminating the Kane merger, and we're turning everything you've shown us over to the authorities. Seraphine's knees nearly went. She didn't let it show. However, Margaret's voice stayed firm. We're requiring enhanced oversight. 18 months, outside audits, complete transparency, and full documentation of your relationship with Mr. Thornwood, so no one can ever say this company's leadership was compromised. Understood, Seraphine said. And she meant it because it was fair. Her father stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. This is a mistake, he said. To the room. To her. To all of it. When the stock traders and the investors run, don't come to me to fix it. You're welcome to your opinion, Seraphine said quietly. But the decision is made. And Alaric Ashford walked out of the room without another word. Two board members who'd voted against her rose and followed. Allies lost, but fewer than she'd feared. When the room finally emptied, Seraphine sat down in her father's old chair, and she let herself shake. Otto found her there 10 minutes later. "We've got Kane in custody downstairs," he said. Federal agents showed up with a warrant. Turns out the regulators had been circling his firm for months. What you gave them was the last piece. He paused. "There's someone else here." She looked up. Elias stood in the doorway, Wren's hand in his. And the girl broke loose and ran across the room and threw her small arms around Seraphine's waist, and Seraphine held onto her like the child was the only solid thing left in the building. "You did it," Wren said. "Priya told us you won." "I did," Seraphine whispered into her hair. "It's over." Elias crossed the room and pulled them both into him, his scarred hand settling on her shoulder, solid and real and warm. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I lost my father." Her voice broke against his chest. "Maybe for good this time. You've found yourself." He said it simply. "That's worth the trade." And they stood there, the three of them, an unlikely thing built out of loss and second chances and the terrifying decision to tell the truth. Until Wren pulled back and looked up at them, serious. "Does this mean Daddy can stop pretending he loves you?" she asked. "Because he does, he told me, when he thought I was asleep." Elias went red to his ears. "Wren, we talked about private conversations, but it's true. The logic was airtight. And you love him too, Miss Seraphine. I can tell. You get the same look Mommy used to get, happy and sad at the same time." Seraphine laughed through her tears. "The months after were not easy, because truth has a cost, and the bill came due. Word of Kane's arrest and the collapsed merger sent Ashford stock into a temporary free fall. Investors demanded explanations. The business press circled, hungry, speculating about a woman who ran a company and let it get personal. Her father gave interviews from Palm Springs, painting his daughter as unstable, sentimental, unfit, though most reporters saw a bitter old man for what he was. But slowly, steadily, the company found its feet again, because Seraphine did more than survive it. She built the transparency the board demanded, and then she built more: an ethics committee, whistleblower protections, a full audit of every subsidiary she owned, hunting for the kind of corner cutting that had crushed a young pianist's hand 13 years before. And Ashford Group came out the other side leaner and cleaner, and with a reputation for decency that drew a different kind of investor, the kind who was tired of the old way. And Elias came back to music, carefully, the way you return to deep water after you've nearly drowned in it once. He started teaching at the community center, the one Seraphine had quietly upgraded, new instruments, soundproofing, without ever putting her name on it. Wren thrived under her father's patient hands, and other kids came too. Kids who'd never had a chance to touch a real piano before. In April, Dr. Byrne came to see them with news. "There's a new microsurgical technique," he said, "nerve reconstruction for old crush injuries. Some of the surgical teams have been having real results with patients who were told the damage was permanent." Elias sat in Seraphine's office, their evening conversations a routine now, accepted by a staff that had learned their boss's private life was off limits, and he shook his head. "I've made peace with what I lost, Cornelius, but what if you didn't have to?" Seraphine leaned forward. "Not all of it, but enough. Enough to perform again, enough to show Wren what you were before." "I show her every day," he said, "in how I live, how I treat people, how I never let the bitterness win. That's worth more than perfect fingers." And that was when Wren, who had settled into Seraphine's lap weeks ago and never left, looked up at her father. "I want to hear you play the way Grandma's old videos show," she said. "Before the accident, when your hands could do anything." And Elias's resistance came apart under his daughter's earnest gaze. "Because it always did." The surgery's experimental, Byrne said gently, pushing a folder across the desk. Recovery is 4 to 6 months, around a 70% chance of meaningful improvement. It might not work. Your hand could even end up worse. I won't pretend otherwise. If it fails, Seraphine said, we deal with it together. But if you don't try, you'll always wonder. The surgery was in July. 8 hours of it. Rebuilding neural connections, cutting away 13 years of scar tissue that had been quietly strangling what function remained. Seraphine took leave to be there, fielding board calls from a hospital waiting room, while Wren colored pictures to hang in the recovery room. Byrne consulted on the procedure, his professional pride wrapped up in proving it could work. When the surgeon finally came out cautiously optimistic, Seraphine felt a hope she hadn't let herself hold. We repaired what we could, he said. Now it's time in therapy. Give it 6 months before we know. And the recovery was brutal, 5 hours a day. Exercises that left him sweating and swearing and asking why he'd ever agreed to any of it. Seraphine watched his frustration in the evenings, the way he'd stare at his own hand like it belonged to a stranger, willing it to bend in ways it had forgotten how to bend. And Wren practiced beside him, her small fingers working through scales, and sometimes he'd reach out with the damaged hand and try to mirror her, and fail and try again. But function came back, slowly, by inches. By September, he could play simple pieces. By October, harder ones, with only the occasional cramp. The hand would never be perfect. It would never have the full fluidity it once possessed. But it was enough. Enough to teach. Enough to create. Enough to make music that mattered. And in November, Byrne proposed something audacious. There's a benefit concert, he said, for the scholarship program. The one we started in Sebastian Vale's name and yours, Elias, December the 22nd. I think you should play it. Elias's first reaction was terror. I'm not ready. What if I fail in front of 500 people? What if my hand seizes up in the middle and everyone sees? You're always telling me it's okay to make mistakes when I practice, Wren said. Airtight again. Why is it different for you? And Seraphine added her voice. You taught me that being brave means doing the right thing scared, she said. Let me teach you it's okay to try and fall short. The courage is in the trying, not the getting it perfect, he agreed. Though his fear built with every week that passed, they chose 3 pieces, Stardust Vow, a Chopin nocturne, and something new, something he'd been writing in the stolen hours between teaching and therapy. He called it Second Movement, because every great piece of music, he told her one night, has more than one part, and their story was only getting started. The Ashford Tower Ballroom filled to capacity on December the 22nd. 500 of them, donors, reporters, and the scholarship students in their best clothes, buzzing with nerves. The story had grown legs beyond anything they'd expected. The janitor who turned out to be a composer, the CEO who chose her conscience over a fortune, the love that nearly burned an empire down and then rebuilt it stronger. Backstage, Elias paced in a black suit. Daddy looked scared, Wren observed from Seraphine's lap, resplendent in the deep blue dress she'd picked herself, legs swinging. Is he going to be okay? He's going to be brave, Seraphine said, smoothing the girl's curls. That's different from okay, but sometimes it's better. The lights went down, and Elias walked onto stage with his daughter's hand in his, and the applause hit them like a wave. He sat at the grand piano, Wren perched on a small bench beside him exactly as they'd practiced. He set his hands over the keys, and he began to play Stardust Vow. The opening notes filled the ballroom, clear as struck glass. This was the piece that had started everything. The song he'd written at 20 for a girl he'd loved from across a summer camp. The song he'd finished for a dying friend and given away without a name. And now he played it in the open, for the first time in his life. Every note carrying 16 years of patience and loss and impossible hope. Halfway through, his hand cramped. Seraphine saw it, the wince, the stutter of his fingers over the keys. The audience might not have caught it, but she knew his tells, and she saw the flash of pure panic cross his face. And Ren reached over, and she put her small hand on his shoulder. Just a light pressure, solidarity without a single word. And Elias pushed through. He compensated with his left hand. He simplified the passages his right couldn't manage. He took the technical limits and turned them into feeling, into interpretation, into something more honest than perfection could ever be. And the final notes hung in the air like a prayer, and the room came to its feet. And the ovation went on so long that Seraphine thought they might never let him continue. But Elias raised his hand for quiet, and he spoke into the microphone. The first time all night. "This last piece is new," he said. "I call it second movement, because every great piece of music has more than one part. And this, all of this, is just our beginning." He found Seraphine's face in the crowd. It's about second chances, about broken things made beautiful, about love that waits quietly until somebody finally calls it into the light. And he began to play, and she understood why he'd kept it secret until now. Because it took the themes of Stardust Vow and it transformed them. Where the old song had spoken of distance, this one spoke of arrival. Where the old song grieved, this one somehow forgave. And near the end, Ren joined him, her small hands picking out a simple countermelody he taught her. Father and daughter making something together, imperfect and true and achingly human. When the music stopped, Elias stood and lifted Ren into his arms and found Seraphine in the crowd. She made her way to the stage through applause that felt less like appreciation and more like witness to something people had almost stopped believing in. He reached down with his scarred hand, the one that had failed him, and healed and failed and healed again, and he took hers. And in the front row, Dr. Cornelius Byrne wept openly, an old man who had taught thousands of students over 40 years, who had watched brilliance bloom and wither and careers rise and fall. Because this, a broken man reclaiming his voice through love, a frozen woman thawing through courage, this was the masterpiece, and the strange, hard-won truth of it settled over the whole room at once. That sometimes the most beautiful music doesn't come from perfect hands. It comes from broken people, brave enough to play anyway. Later, when the ballroom had emptied and the caterers had gone and the great tree in the lobby stood alone in the dark, the three of them lingered by the old piano. Ren had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder, one hand still curled around a program with his name printed on it, printed in full for the first time. Elias Thornwood, composer. He'd finally signed his name to the song. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Seraphine said quietly. "That boy in the corner, giving away the most beautiful thing he had and asking for nothing." She looked at him. He waited a very long time for someone to see him. "He wasn't waiting for that," Elias said. "He was just loving somebody. The waiting was the world's idea, not his." He shifted the sleeping child against his chest. "I never thought I'd get the ending. I made my peace with the middle. And then you came down a staircase in a red dress and told a rich man to apologize to a janitor. And I thought, there she is." 16 years later, there she is. Seraphine's eyes filled. "Play me something," she said. "One more, before we go home." And he sat, careful of the sleeping girl, and rested his ruined hand on the keys and played, softly, so as not to wake her. A few bars of something old, and a few bars of something new, blurred together until you couldn't tell where the grief ended and the beginning began, because that was the truth of it in the end. That the worst thing in your life and the best thing in your life can be the very same song. That a hand can be crushed and still make music. That a heart can be frozen for 16 years and still, when the right melody finds it, remember how to break open. And that it is never ever too late to be seen, to be known, to be loved for who you are and not for what you can provide. Outside, the snow kept falling over the city, soft and forgiving, covering everything. And inside, in the warm dark by an old piano, A man who had spent his whole life believing he was nobody played a lullaby for his daughter and the woman he'd loved across half his life. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, his hands did not shake at all. They were home, not a place, a choice, the kind you make every day in 1,000 small ways, one measure at a time. And the song, the one he'd started at 20 and never finished, the one that had traveled 16 years to find its way back to him, went on. Because some songs are too important not to sing, even with broken hands, especially then